get started. Sorry, a couple minutes late. I got started talking, and as you'll hear, if you don't know me yet, I don't have a problem talking if I'm given the opportunity. But I'm so happy to be here today with y'all, and thanks for coming. I'm going to talk about herbs with cut flower potential, so hopefully you'll find this very interesting, and if you aren't currently thinking about these crops, then I encourage you to be thinking about these crops. Are any of you currently cut flower growers? Okay, so good. So are you currently using any herbs in your arrangements and things?
I started with herbs and I didn't see a way to sell them where I live on there.
Okay, great.
And so I still like to grow herbs, so I grow them anyways. And I do use basil, although basil's I do use
Yep.
a lot of them.
Okay, good. Well, I'll probably be telling you things you already know, but hopefully everybody else will learn a few tips or things to be thinking about. What I wanted to mention just real quickly is, and the reason I ask about people being cut flower growers is because we have a really growing cut flower industry in Kentucky. And so we have the USDA census says 233, but we know that there are more cut flower growers than that, and they're some maybe haven't completed the census or are new since that happened. But one thing that we have been doing at UK is an interactive map. So if you do decide to have a cut flower operation or incorporate that into your current production systems, we are happy to help promote your business. So we have just a little simple form you fill out, tell us a little bit of information about your business, and then we publish this interactive map where customers can click on a county, and they can zoom in to see, is there somebody near me who I can buy products from? Or is there a U-Pick? Is there somebody that does workshops? So we really like to have people represented on here and like to help promote your business where we possibly can. So also in the USDA Ag Census, we know that there are at least 220 acres in production. So just doing rough math, most of those cut flower growers are an acre or less. So these can be very profitable crops on small acres. So I know that most of you probably have smaller operations, and these can, like I said, be very profitable. And that's kind of my last point here is current estimates are that the market value for cut flower production in Kentucky is just over $2 million. Most people are selling direct to consumers. So maybe they're doing that from on-farm sales, or maybe they're doing farmers markets. So there are a lot of different market channels that you can participate in with cut flowers. But all this to say, there's a lot of potential. And like I said, I want to talk about maybe some specific crop recommendations that you may want to think about. So I want to talk just a little bit about what does make a good cut flower, because there's so many ornamental species out there, so many native species. So kind of how do you make that decision of what to grow or what would be best to grow? So sometimes it may be just physical attraction of that crop. Is it a nice shape? Is it a nice color? Is it easy to grow? Very few pests and diseases. I will say deer resistance can be an issue, and that's one thing kind of about herbs is a lot of those are a little less susceptible to deer damage. And in Kentucky, certainly we have a lot of deer pressure, and particularly in certain areas we do. But also things about seasonality. This may fit with other crops you're growing, that it may be a little earlier offering that you can have, or maybe a little bit later in the year. So there's some seasonality. Also planting time. If you're currently growing certain crops, maybe cut flowers can be part of that production, and it may fit in with other things that you're doing. Another thing I like to think about is long lasting. We do have a lot of crops that are beautiful, like daylilies, but that's not something you can really use as a cut flower because it just doesn't last long enough. I'm not talking about lilies like Asian lilies, but like a daylily. Transportation, if you're doing off-farm sales, that's not such a big deal. But if you're trying to do some wholesale markets or you're transporting to farmers markets and things, some things are extremely delicate and they aren't great for cut flowers. They're beautiful maybe in the landscape, but like as a cut flower, they just aren't really durable enough. Multi-purpose, we were just talking a little bit about like culinary use versus cut flower use. And again, that's one thing I think is great about herbs is there are multi-uses for these plants. But something like that, you might want to just think about different utility. And then my most important description or consideration is, can that crop be profitable? Because some things are a little more expensive to grow, maybe require a lot of management, thinking like a dahlia. And other things are very easy to grow, require very little management, inexpensive, something like maybe mint. And those can be very profitable. So I always want you to think about that when you're making crop selections. Anything, not just cut flowers, but is this profitable to me? And like knowing how much it costs you to grow a crop and sell a crop, so that you're always being as profitable as you possibly can. So I want to talk just a little bit about some language, maybe a little bit of vocabulary that we use when we're talking about cut flowers, and kind of thinking about a bouquet and deconstructing it down to its individual component parts. So there are really three categories we talk about in cut flower production. So one is the focal flower. So those are things that are going to be really eye-catching, and they're going to be like the like primary part of a bouquet. So you can see in this one, it's the dahlia. That's like the money maker. That's the most expensive per stem cost in that bouquet. So you may have 1 to 3 of these in a bouquet, and those are going to be generally the more expensive cut flower species, and like I said, very few of them, but they really make that bouquet. And then we have another classification of something that's like a filler. So this could be something with flowers on it, but they're going to be less obvious, less bright, they're not going to compete with that focal, but they're going to complement it. So in this bouquet, I would consider the gomphrena in there, the marigolds, the zinnias, the straw flowers. All of those are complementing that dahlia, and so it's the filler. And then there's another category that we consider foliage, and sometimes a plant can be a filler or a foliage depending on how you're picking it. But those are things that are providing the greenery, they're providing a lot of structure, and they're providing a lot of bulk in there because you want a really nice big full bouquet. And these are things that are a little bit less expensive that can make that look really lush and full, but you're not putting a lot of money on a per stem basis into that bouquet. So I'll use these words as I go through and talk about different species, but that's just kind of when you hear cut flower growers talking about it, of like, oh, I use that as a filler, or this is my focal in this bouquet. You'll kind of have a little better idea of what that means. So multi-purpose. So the thing I really like about herbs is this multiple uses. So you can use them for culinary purposes. So if you are either fresh or dried, you can use them as very attractive cut flowers. A lot of them are really nice landscape plants. So I think there's a lot of usefulness to these, and especially if you're using as a culinary or in the landscape, like you don't have to feel bad if you don't use it in your cut flower. Like you still are getting other kinds of uses. So I really like the multi-purpose opportunities with a lot of these species. And to be honest, I'm just going to cover 10 because we don't have a ton of time today. Whoops, sorry. Not very smooth with that. And there are plenty of others too. And so some things I won't cover that you'll be like, oh, but that's a great one. And, just because of time, we can't cover all the different ones. So the first one, though, that I do want to talk about is basil. And this is a great plant for lots of different reasons. And a lot of people do currently use this as a cut flower. It is a summer annual, so we've had some pretty cold temperatures now. So if you have been growing basil, probably looks pretty terrible in your garden or in your production area. So that's one thing to consider with the seasonality. Definitely a hot temperature summer annual. Also full sun. You're going to want to have a really bright sunny area where you would grow this plant. Size-wise, you need a little bit of space. These can be 20 to 36 inches or bigger, depending on what the variety is and depending on the cultural conditions. So if you have pretty fertile soil, full sun, a lot of water, they're going to get pretty good size. But plant spacing, you can cram these pretty close together, especially if you're doing repeated harvests and you're really taking a lot of that plant material. So you could do as narrow as 6 inches, which is pretty tight, or you could have a little more plant spacing there. And think this is for cut flower production, not if you're doing it in the landscape or necessarily if you're doing it from a culinary standpoint. So a little bit more about basil. So it can be direct seeded or you can do plugs. So if you're doing plugs, you can start the transplants inside and have them ready to go when we have nice weather outside. So the days to germination, so you'll see in my slides I have DTG, and that's just days to germination. So if you're doing these in a greenhouse or you're doing these in kind of your little propagation setup. So 5 to 10 days, it's pretty quick to start seed. They're really pretty easy. It's a pretty easy crop. But you need to think backwards of when you want to transplant, and then your seeding date will depend on when you want to plant it outside in the field. So you just count backwards about 6 weeks, and then that's when you would do your seeding. And for the different species I'll talk about that a little bit. But I do want you to be thinking about seed purchases now, because you're going to want to buy things now so that you're ready to go when you're starting to seed in the spring and then being ready to plant out around mid-May here in Kentucky. A couple of varieties just to mention, cinnamon and Mrs. Burns lemon and aromato are ones that are really pretty common and very attractive and pretty widely used. And just so you can see kind of maybe how these would look, in the picture there in the middle of the screen, it's being used as a filler because it's got those flowers on there, very complementary to those zinnias, and really kind of sets that off there. And then the picture there on the right-hand side is that aromato variety. So it's more of a purple. In varieties, you can have a lime green color, you can have a dark green color, you can have purple. So basils come in a lot of different varieties, but all of them have kind of that spike flower, little white, very inconspicuous flower on there. So a couple things to think about. You can use it as a filler or as a foliage plant. So another acronym I have here to just explain, DTH is days to harvest. So thinking about when you want to have those plants ready to be harvested to be using in cut flowers. So this one is a little bit longer, so 85 to 100 days. And that may seem like a long time of like, well, I would have a plant, but what you want are those really long stems. So it may take a while for it to get really good size. And then also if you're interested in that flower, it's going to take time for it to mature enough to have that white spike flower on there. So just a couple things if you're interested in growing this plant. You want to let it get just a little bit woody. If it's really lush and tender, it's going to flop all over. So if you let it get a little bit woody, it'll stand up really nice and straight in the bouquet or in the vase. Another thing is cut it very hard and cut it very frequently. And when I say cut it hard, that means back towards the soil level. Like you don't want to take just the top. You want to go really long, a 24-inch stem, really cut that back. And so we call that cutting hard because you're really taking a lot of that plant. And again, cut often because you'll get those side shoots and you'll get more, more stems that you'll be able to harvest. And then I mentioned this a little bit before about cold temperatures. So not just from a standpoint of it being out in the production area or in your garden to be able to harvest, but also when you're thinking about post-harvest storage, you want to be very careful at what temperature you're storing that. So like if you have a cool bot that you're storing things in, you want to just be conscious because if you have it set too cold, you're going to get brown, icky lesions on your leaves and the basil's not going to look very good. So something to be thinking about from a post-harvest standpoint. And of course, those were just a couple examples of some of our local cut flower growers who are using basil in different arrangements that they're selling. So bee balm is another one. So different Monarda species. There are some that are annual and then some that are perennial. And so I guess just kind of a pause to talk a little bit about annuals and perennials. So annuals, those are the crops that you would plant every year. And so from seed to harvest, they're going to be within that season. Perennials are those plants that you can plant out, whether it's in production rows or it's in the landscape, that you're going to be able to harvest from year after year. Some things are short-lived perennials, so a couple years, like sage, or or rosemary even, or tender perennials that are maybe not, depending on our weather, and then longer lived perennials that you'll have multiple years. So when you're thinking about your production costs, that's very important, because that annual is going to be a reoccurring cost that you have every year from seed or plugs that you're purchasing. Those perennials, you can make that one-time investment. So on a per stem basis, it may be much less expensive for you to grow, and the production costs of that, because you've made that one maybe higher initial investment, but you're going to be able to harvest from that crop over a longer period. So Monarda is one of those species that may be an annual, so you would be planting that year after year, or it may be a perennial, so you would be able to have that for many years to harvest from. This is one, it can be grown in part shade, but really it's going to perform a lot better in sun. And so you can, depending on the conditions that you have, you could get by with it in a little bit of a more shady area, but really sun is preferred. Also, species dependent the size. So some are smaller, so they may be 12 inches. Others can be, 48 inches, so 4 feet, pretty good size. And that, again, is going to be dependent on the variety or the species, if it's one of these annuals versus a perennial. Also the growing conditions, fertility, lots of things will factor into that ultimate size that you would have. And plant spacing, these can be planted pretty close together if it's an annual. If it's one of the perennials, these do spread a little bit. So you could go a little bit wider spacing knowing that it's going to fill in there, but can be pretty close together. And the picture here of this purple one, this is one of those annual species that is one of the Monardas. So days to germination, this one's a little bit longer, about 2 weeks to get really good germination. You can direct seed in the spring, like just the seeds right out into the soil. But this one too, like you would count backwards, thinking about starting seed to plant out as a plug. So 7 to 9 weeks. So that's a little bit longer time to do your seeding, maintain those seedlings, and then be ready to transplant out into the garden or into your production area. Varieties of note, lambada is an annual variety. That's the one you saw on the previous slide. So you'd be treated as an annual. You'd be planting it every year and harvesting it. And then lambada is here on this one. And then a panorama mix is multiple colors. And Monardas can be found in a range. So from reds to pinks and purples to whites. So there are a lot of different colorways that are available with this species. So here's another one. This is that panorama mix that's kind of more the pinky purples to a little bit of red. Again, filler, fresh, but also this is one, when you talk about multi-purpose, that can be used as a dried flower. Now, it's not going to be this vibrant if you do it as a dried flower, but that's another option. So if you maybe don't get to harvesting things because you're busy with other things, you could look at it as a dried flower. So you wouldn't, it gives you kind of some value-added opportunities. But also, like if it's something that you don't sell, that you've harvested it or you had more than you needed for your bouquets, you could always dry that. And you could use it in dried arrangements, or you could use it in other kinds of dried applications. So days to harvest, again, this is a longer one. So you got to be thinking about that of if you're planting it in May, it's going to be pretty late summer before you're going to be able to do some harvesting on there. And then a couple of harvest notes. You want to let the flowers be opening and showing color before you harvest it, because if you harvest it too early, you're not going to get these really nice vibrant colors. And then the other harvest note I just want you to think about, powdery mildew can be a problem with this plant. That may not be a big deal because normally you'll strip the foliage. So it might still be fine as a cut flower, but just think about that. And also, like if you're using this in your landscape, it can kind of get a little ratty looking. So it may be something you would want under production conditions where you don't mind maybe particularly how attractive it looks at certain times of year. But that can be a problem with this plant. You can get powdery mildew, which will be like this white, like hazy, like sort of appearance to the leaves. But again, you can strip those off, and it might not be an issue at all for you. So the other one I want to talk a little bit about is chives, which is an allium species, and there's two different ones I'll make a note of. And these can be, these are generally perennials, so you plant it once, and then you'll have multiple years from which you can harvest. And they're going to generally bloom in late spring and early summer. Sun generally is preferred, but they will tolerate a little bit of shade. And these aren't really, really big plants, so you're going to have about 12 to 18 inches, and you'll want to cut these down pretty much at ground level to have that stem length. And these can be planted pretty close together, so about 9 inches. So days to germination, these are ones you can do very easily, either direct to seeding it or growing plugs and transplanting out. 7 to 10 days, pretty fast. Weeks to transplant, 6 to 8. So, a couple months out, you want to be thinking about seeding to be ready to transplant. And there are 2 different species. One is kind of our traditional chives, and then other is garlic chives. So the purple flower on the previous slide, that is just kind of straight chives, and then this one here is garlic chives. So it's a white flower and a little more open, a little different flower shape to this one. So a couple things, using this as a filler, really nice complementary flower, kind of small, kind of inconspicuous. Days to harvest, again, this is going to be just a little bit longer, about 85 days from seed to harvest. Now, if you're doing a perennial, that's going to change a little bit because especially with weather conditions, it's going to start growing when the weather gets nice, and then you're going to have flowers probably just a little bit earlier. One thing to note, you want to harvest this pretty early, so like as they're starting to open, so you have really nice color. But the really important reason to harvest these early and use them is if they have set seed inside that flower and it is in an arrangement on someone's table or on their counter, if those seeds start falling out, your customer's going to think they've got a mouse because the seeds look a lot like mouse droppings, and you do not want that because then they're going to be like, what? They're going to be unhappy. So this one is one to be very careful about when you harvest it, because definitely early, before you have seed set, before you have opportunity for just dissatisfaction with your customers, because you don't want to have that happen. So the next one is dill, and this is one that I was like, but then, like this bouquet variety, I really love it. And like seeing it in arrangements, it is really very, very attractive. And this like chartreuse color is super striking. So I was kind of neutral, but now I'm really a fan of dill. So it's an annual, so you're going to have to plant it every year. And sunny conditions, you're really going to want to have a lot of sun. And these can get massive, so you want to have enough space for this. Some varieties are a little bit smaller, but like bouquet and some other varieties, they get absolutely massive. So you can plant them a little tighter, but this is one, and I should have made note of this, this is one you're going to have some kind of support, because otherwise it's going to get very floppy and you're going to have a mess and it's going to be hard to harvest. But like it is a really, really pretty plant to use in cut flower arrangements. Days to germination, it's really pretty fast. You can direct seed this out, or you can start them inside and then transplant out. This is one I would definitely do succession plantings with. So I would have more seed that I planted, at intervals coming along. So you always have more available and you have more growing that you can use. So that's what we call succession planting. And that way you always have a supply that you can be using. And I mentioned bouquet, that's the name of this variety. And it is just beautiful. I'm really, as you can tell, I'm a fan of this one. So you can use it as foliage or filler. So when it's that really lacy, light foliage, just to complement the and provide some bulk in those bouquets, or once it has that flower on it, can really complement what you've chosen as your focal flower. But also fresh and dried. So dried, I think more of like culinary purposes, because these do shatter really, really easily. So you want to be very careful about when you're harvesting. Like you don't want to let it to get all the way to seed set, because then the dried, they'll shatter and they'll be kind of a mess. But if you harvest those a little bit early, they can make a really nice little dried flower. But if you're using it, be very, very careful, very delicate, and they can kind of disintegrate pretty quickly if they're when they're dried. Days to harvest, again, kind of 40-ish days to really get up nice and big before they've started creating that flower head and started going into seed production. But if you're interested in that with more of the flower, you're looking at more like 70 days to be able to harvest that. So that's why I was saying, kind of succession planting, start transplants, start your seeds early, have that early transplant, do some direct seeding out into the garden so you have a really nice long supply. So some harvest notes. Mentioned this a little bit about harvesting a little bit early. So right as those little florets are opening and you see a lot of color, you don't want to let them go too far or they'll shatter pretty easily. And really starting when you have 1 to 2 of those little florets starting to open. Another thing about, it's not really a harvest note, it's a production consideration, and why I was not super excited about dill for a long time is pest control. So you may want to think about netting or something, because if you have different types of caterpillars, there are this is a host plant for a lot of different butterflies, which is wonderful, but man, they can eat. And if you have those caterpillars in your production area, they will denude these and you'll have a little stem. And so all that work that you did to have these beautiful dill plants wasted, and they can eat it so fast. So you might want to think about some kind of protection that you can do. I don't think it's worth spraying for sure, but like some kind of protection that you can exclude those, those caterpillars from eating the plants. But having seen it, I'm a convert, and I really do like it now, but be careful of pest control. So another one, feverfew. This is another one I was not super excited about, but it's really growing on me, and I'm really liking it a lot more now, especially that there are white and yellow varieties available. And this one, probably you'll want to treat it like an annual, but if you're lucky and you have a protected area, or we have a particularly mild winter, it might be a tender perennial, so you might get it to come back in a particularly protected area. Full sun, you're going to want to have a really nice exposure. These can get pretty good size, so 28 to 36 inches total. And so plant spacing, you're going to want to give it maybe just a little bit more space to develop and make those really nice big sprays. So 6 to 12 inches-ish on plant spacing. So days to germination, about 2 weeks, 10 to 14 days. Generally, you would not direct seed this. You would want to start the seeds inside or by plugs, and then be ready to transplant out into your production area. So this is one that you can do in the spring for a summer crop, or you can plant it in the fall for that early spring crop the next year. Probably you would want to do this in a more protected area, or be able to provide a little bit of protection. So maybe you do some row covers or something like that to do that fall planting, to have them in the spring. So a couple of varieties, the Magic series, so there's whites and yellows. Those are ones that are really nice and have been bred for cut flowers. So you see a dried bouquet up there. So uses, you can do this fresh, you can do dried. They really hold up pretty well as a dried flower. And generally this is going to be something that's a filler, because it's that small, kind of inconspicuous flower, but a lot of flowers, individual flowers on a stem. And like I said, the yellow is very attractive, the white's very attractive. Some of these more pom-pom types that are really a nice little ball. And then others are kind of more this flat, where you'll see like the white petals and you'll see the yellow interior. So very different looks depending on the variety, but both very attractive little flower to use in different types of arrangements. This one you want to harvest kind of early, so just as it's opening for fresh use. But if you're doing it for dried, you want it to really develop and be nice and open, so that as you dry that, it can maintain that form and that shape that you're interested in. So lavender, this is probably one that you were like, oh yeah, that's going to be on the list. It's a workhorse. People think of it, use in the landscape, use as culinary, but also kind of use as a cut flower, and particularly as a dried flower. A lot of people use it in that respect. Generally, these are going to be perennials, planted in full sun. One thing, production note on this, is you do not want a wet area. If it's a wet area, you're going to have disease, they're going to look manky, and they're not going to survive. So you want to have a pretty sunny, pretty dry area to grow these. 12 to 18 inches height, depending on the variety, and plant spacing, kind of the same thing along that 12 inches. Lots of different varieties out there available. Days to germination, 14 to 21. This is one that takes a little bit longer, so you're probably not going to want to direct seed it. And I've never had luck planting these out in the soil, like always doing plugs. But these are tons of varieties. Most of these you can probably pick up like at a garden center, or you can mail order different varieties that you're interested in and eliminate a lot of that germination stress and work, and just buy the plugs and plant them out. Or if you're buying plant material and planting out, just cost. If you're buying, like a 1 gallon plant, it's going to be a lot more expensive, but perennial, so you're going to be able to harvest for a longer period of time. So generally these English types, you'll see Munstead, that's kind of the traditional, but there are also French lavenders and Spanish lavenders, and those are the ones that have the little like wings on them, and they're really attractive too. So those would be others to consider. Filler, use it fresh and dried. We think of, that's kind of the traditional picture, probably what you thought of when you were thinking of lavender. Lot of use. One thing I don't like about this plant is you don't get really long stem length. So you're not going to have a 24-inch stem. They're going to be pretty, small, 12 or even, maybe quite a bit smaller than that. And these you're going to want to harvest when those flowers are beginning to open. And those on that spike, they develop at different stages, and so kind of as an interval. So it's when those very first ones are starting to open. So you don't want to wait until like the middle ones or the top ones, because it's just not going to last very long. So mint, this one, anybody have mint in their yard or grow mint? Like, it can be extremely vigorous, so this is a production note to be thinking about. You want to have the right place to put this. You might want to do it in pots and sink those in the ground, because even if you're harvesting it, that is going to help maintain it and keep it in control. But like, it is an extremely, extremely vigorous plant. So you want to have thought about that. Don't just plant it anywhere. It is perennial, and I've beat that to death about being vigorous, so just keep that in mind. Sun, it's going to be much more prolific. Part shade, that will kind of help keep it a little bit more manageable too. So you can use that as a management strategy. These get pretty good size, 18 inches to even up to 36 inches. They can be pretty good size plants. And these plant spacing's kind of weird, because you get a lot of those rhizomes, and you're going to get a lot of spreading. So you can maybe go a little bit wider, like creating your mint patch, that then you can kind of keep it all maintained in there, but definitely will fill in an area pretty quickly. You can do these from seed. Days to germination, 10 to 14 days. If you want to create your own plugs to transplant, about 6 to 8 weeks, thinking ahead. And there are tons of varieties out there commercially available, so you could pick these up at a garden center, or again, you could order from different mail order sources. Again, a little bit more expensive, but it's easy. You just go buy it, then plant it. Lots of different mint species available. So peppermint, spearmint, apple mint, pineapple mint. The pineapple mint is the one here in the middle of the slide, and that is variegated. So it's not sick. There's nothing wrong with it. It just has that variegated pattern where it's going to be 2 different colors. So you're going to have a lot of white sort of blotching on the leaf, and that can be very attractive in cut flower bouquets. But you may be more traditional. You may like just the green, and so you might choose a different species or a different variety just because it's that nice green color. These do get a little flower on them. It's a little white, sort of inconspicuous, so you can use it as filler. You can use it as foliage. A lot of utility there. Days to harvest, lengthy, 70 to 80 days if you're growing from seed. Once those perennials are established, that's going to be ready pretty early in the spring. Once they start growing and you get some length on there, you can start cutting it. And this is one, too, you would want to cut very frequently, because, again, pretty vigorous plant. But also kind of an interesting thing about this one is it will produce roots as a cut flower. So, like, something for you to be thinking about. It's probably not a big deal. Most of your customers are probably going to throw the bouquet away before it happens. But if you have done some cuttings, you may notice that, and just, to not freak out about it, but that's totally normal. In water, mint is going to root. And also, that's kind of a propagation thing, that if you want to increase the number of plants that you have, you can take cuttings yourself, root them, plant them out. So maybe you invest in some stock plants, and then you increase your number of plants by doing cuttings and rooting those yourself. But you can see a couple pictures here. So the one on the right, you see the mint right in the middle, is really nice, contribution to that bouquet. The one on the left, and it's kind of hard to see, but in the bucket there, towards the right, like right at the edge, that is being sold as a bunch of mint as a cut flower. So this is at the Kentucky Flower Market here in Frankfort. And so wholesalers may be interested in that. So again, you may have a lot of mint, and you might want to consider that. You may want to offer it, create a relationship with a local florist or a restaurant or something, and you can do like just bunches of mint. Which I guess at Derby time, that could be very profitable if you had it and you had a connection for people who wanted to make mint juleps. So oregano, another very common culinary herb, but really can make an attractive cut flower. So there are some that are pink and some that are white. This is, again, a perennial, so you plant it once, you're going to be able to harvest for multiple years. Full sun preferred, will do okay in part shade. Depending on the variety, can be pretty compact, so 8 inches or so, all the way up to 24. This is another one you would really want to provide some support to, or it's going to flop all over the place. So plant spacing, you can do this a little bit narrower, 12 inches. Days to germination, again, you can seed this yourself, 7 to 14 days, thinking out 8 to 10 weeks to be ready to transplant. Another set that you can pick up at a garden center pretty easily. So one thing to really note if you're buying seed or you're buying plants from a garden center or mail order, you want to be sure you get an upright form. Some of these grow or like a creeping type and grow along the soil, and so that you don't want that for a cut flower. You want the ones that are going to be upright that you can really get nice long stem length from. So I love it. It's really attractive with some support and some staking, really nice long stems, but they're kind of fuzzy, and so they're really just kind of an interesting little addition to bouquets. Can be used filler of foliage. Mention the white flowers or the pink flowers. Pretty long from seed to harvest, but again, a perennial, so you can, depending on the weather conditions, may be able to harvest pretty early. And this is another one you would want to cut pretty frequently to get more production. And I'm getting close to the end, so I'm going to go kind of a little bit faster, but a couple more to talk about. So rosemary, this is another one, can be a tender perennial here. Probably want to treat it as an annual unless you have a really nice protected area where you can really get it to come back year after year. Full sun, again, this is one that likes a little bit on the drier side. These variety dependent can be, 18 inches, can get really big. I mean, some can be, I'm 60 inches, so like that's a pretty nice long stem that you could have from a cut flower standpoint. But again, it's going to be kind of tender, so you may not get things that big. Grown as an annual, going to be a little bit smaller. Perennial, I think reliably you could see 24 to 30 inch stem lengths. And depending on variety, you might get a little bit different colors. So days to germination, this is one also you could do seed, you could buy plants. Lots of varieties available out there. Again, this is one that you can have a creeper or you can have an upright form. So you just want to be sure that you're getting an upright form so it'll have nice long stem length on there. Some can be more green, dark green, light green, and some kind of have more of a grayish color to them. But you can see used in bouquets. So foliage, filler, fresh, dried, lots of use for this. Days to harvest, again, from seed can be pretty lengthy or to get that really nice stem length. And the harvest note here is these are extremely long-lasting, so you can cut and use for a long period of time. Sage, just kind of real quickly here, another one that can be a perennial. Prefers sun, can tolerate a little bit of shade, 6 inches to 30 inches, depending on the variety. Plant spacing, you can plant these pretty tightly, so 12-ish inches. Days to germination, this is another one you can do the seed germination, but you can also buy plants. You can, think about that. Lots of different varieties available out there. Some are green, some are more of a gray, some are tricolor, and you can see the tricolor sage here in the kind of bottom of that arrangement. So a green, a white, and maybe a little blush of pink or purple. So can really be quite an attractive plant in the landscape and to use as a filler or foliage in a cut flower arrangement. Again, fresh or dried usage. So that's kind of the number 10 if you were counting. Just some general notes. I kind of gone through a lot of these as I've been talking. You can do seed, you can do plugs, you can do plant material, whatever fits for you from a budget standpoint, from an an availability standpoint, a lot of decisions there. I do want to make one quick note about if you're purchasing seed. You may read in a seed catalog that something is pelleted or that something is primed, and I just want you to know what that means because you'll see those are a lot more expensive, and that's because the pelleting, so this is a coating that is applied to that seed to make it really easy to plant and really easy to see. So for this basil variety, the pelleted seed is the little green balls there. And you may choose to do that because it does really make it easier, but again, more expensive. Prime seed, this is a procedure that a seed company will do that, especially for those that take a long time to germinate, that they'll basically pre-germinate it for you. So they'll start to germinate and then they'll stop it, and then they may, usually it's going to be pelleted too, but they'll then prepare it for sales. Now the thing, prime seed's going to be more expensive. It is going to germinate a whole lot faster, but also that is something you would want to plant that year you purchased it. You can't carry prime seed over. Like, don't try to store it, it will die because it's already progressing to germination. So something to think about there. It may be worth it from a financial standpoint, but you do have to treat it very carefully. Some seed are going to require light or dark for germination. That's going to be on the seed packet. If you're not sure of the temperature, generally about 70 degrees is going to be pretty appropriate if you're germinating yourself. And then importantly, water gently and regularly, because if you forget, and that's another thing making your decision, if you're not going to be able to manage and take care of those seedlings, you're probably better off buying plant material. So buying plugs or buying 1 gallon or 2 gallon or whatever at the garden center, because it is a lot of maintenance and you got to be prepared for that, because you don't want to go to all that trouble and expense and then you kill it because you didn't water it. So something to think about. Most of the species excuse me, that I've talked about are going to have a harvest life about 7 to 10 days. So pretty nice lifespan there. Excuse me, sorry. Be sure you harvest when it's cool outside, so first thing in the morning, and put them directly into water. That's going to give you a lot better long-term condition of those plants. Think about value-added products that you can do with these different things, not just as a cut flower, but culinary uses, dried, different things. And the one thing I do want to remind you, this can be a super great selling point, or it can put people off. Most of these are going to be very highly scented. So some people love that. Other people don't like it. So just be prepared for that. Some things much more aromatic than others. Generally, that's going to be when somebody crushes them, or like if they're arranging, or when you're harvesting. Most of the time, once it's actually an arrangement, people are not going to notice it that much, but just something to think about. And then just here at the end, if you want more information, we have a lot of resources on the Center for Crop Diversification website. And so you can see production information, much more detailed than what I've gone through. And then also I want to let you know that in January, we have the Kentucky Fruit and Vegetable Conference. So we have a cut flower short course on day 2 of that conference, which will be the 7th of January. Love to see you there. Opportunity to learn a whole lot more about and actually I don't think there's anything about herbs on that program, but lots of other cut flower topics. So I appreciate your time, and I am over just a little bit, but if you have any questions, I'll be around here a little bit. I'm easy to find. I should have put my QR code to me up there, but you're welcome to contact me. I'm happy to answer any questions for you. And I hope that, maybe some of these are things you'd want to think about and start looking at, different varieties and seed availability, and maybe start to use them for your operation. So thank you very much. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker, although she just stepped out in the back. So we'll wait. So I guess I can take a question until Katie comes back in the room. So any questions for me about cut flowers generally, or using herbs as cut flowers? No? Okay. Well, I guess if you want to stretch a little bit, and then I'll grab Katie, and she'll do some discussion on pricing.